It's one of the richest countries in the world, yet Ireland has what campaigners are calling a homelessness crisis, and it's getting worse.
I'm Dan Ming, and you're in the stream, live on Al Jazeera and YouTube.
In January, we had an overwhelming online response to a show we did on this issue. Take a look.
The housing crisis in Ireland has, without a doubt, reached an emergency level. And Apollo House, I think, is an expression of the social movement arising in Ireland for the right to housing. I mean, you can point to any dimension of it, and it's a complete disaster. I mean, there's 140,000 people on the social housing waiting list who should be getting social housing. And the three main reasons that people are becoming homeless today in Ireland is rising rents, and it's unemployment, and it's people who are falling out of direct provision.
Well, back then, a group of musicians and housing activists illegally occupied Apollo House, a vacant government-owned building in the center of the Irish capital, Dublin, and turned it into a makeshift homeless shelter. What they did caught the imagination of the country. People turned up at the building wanting to offer food and clothes. A mattress seller provided bedding, and Oscar winner Glen Hansard and other well-known musicians sang protest songs from the roof.
So why, almost a year later, have things gotten worse? When we did that show, about 6,500 people were officially listed as homeless in Ireland. This month, the number passed 8,000 for the first time, and almost 3,000 of those people are children. The numbers have been rising fast in recent years, and campaigners say the real figure could be even higher.
So joining us to discuss this issue in Dublin, singer, songwriter, and activist Glen Hansard. Also in Dublin, Erica Fleming is a housing campaigner. She was once homeless herself. And Noel Rock TD is parliamentarian for the governing Fine Gael party. The Minister of Housing also sent us an outline of government housing policies and included this statement. The Minister for Housing, Eoin Murphy, acknowledges that the current level of homelessness, which families and individuals are experiencing across the country, is totally unacceptable. This issue remains the top priority for government. Resources and funding are not an issue and will not be an obstacle to the urgent delivery and heavy lifting that is now required. Well, with that, welcome to the show, everyone. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Glen Hansard, who I'll start this conversation with, here's a little clip of him performing.
Hello, how you struggle with your power. Keep your back tied to the wall. As you are counted among the cowards, they didn't see it all.
Well, Glen, from musician and actor to activist, what led you to this fight against homelessness in Ireland?
Well, for me, it was just, each year doing some gigs and, giving money over to the homeless charities, Peter McFerry, Simon. I mean, I used to volunteer at Simon when I was a kid. Homelessness is something that I guess is fairly close to my own family. And so it was always just something that really kind of concerned me, and it just seemed to be getting worse and worse. And so I found myself sitting with some friends and, having pints and, talking about the situation. And I guess if you call yourself a sort of socially conscious liberal, then at some point, I guess you have to sort of step up. And what we did was a few friends sat around and talked, and then the talk turned into a meeting. And we had a meeting and we were talking about, things to do and whatnot, and some crazy ideas were floated. And but the one that seemed the most kind of, I suppose, sort of humane and simple was just to take a building that was in the ownership of NAMA, which in our opinion belongs to the people of Ireland, and basically create a shelter, because there was a lot of people on the streets during that particular period, and it was the winter months. And what you have to understand in Ireland is we have the highest winter mortality rate in the OECD. So poor people die in Ireland in the winter. So we simply wanted to create a space where people could go, and because there wasn't enough beds in the system, even though the government told us there was not. And we basically took over a building. We Mattress Mick, a wonderful man, gave us a load of mattresses, and we basically made a makeshift shelter. And an incredible amount of people, an incredible amount of resources were given to us. And actually, we were running a pretty tight ship in there. And of course, that we were given a court order to get out, and
Right.
and once that court order was given, we had to get out.
Right.
And because the services wouldn't come in and help people against the law. They were doing everything. They were doing everything in their power to help, but once the court order stopped, we had to get out because the services wouldn't come in, and that would become a very dangerous place to be.
Right. So we'll address more on those services and whether that perspective is shared amongst our guests. But you mentioned, as you were speaking, that this is an issue that's close to your own family members. I pulled up a headline here that those in Ireland might be familiar with. Close to home, singer Glen Hansard reveals family problems which are driving him to help the homeless. Do you feel comfortable sharing those issues?
Absolutely, it's an awful headline. Absolutely, I mean, my aunt, my mother's youngest daughter, died in homelessness 2 Christmases ago on a bench in Birmingham. She made some poor choices in her life. She was an alcoholic, and she passed away in homelessness there. But also, I mean, homelessness is so broad. I mean, there are so many. I grew up in a house where my grandmother and my grandfather lived in the house. With my cousins, 2 cousins of mine lived in the house. We were, Irish people are very proud, and we're very resourceful, and we'll sort of, when things don't go right or you're getting kicked out of your house, thankfully there's someone to go to. But there's a huge amount of hidden homelessness in Ireland. I mean, you've got a figure of 8,140, but actually the number of people who are without a home across the globe, across the country. People like a young lad who lives next to me, he plays a bit of bass music. He was living in town with his mates. He was in college. And they couldn't afford his rent anymore because the rents are skyrocketing. The landlord put them up by 55% just before Simon Coveney's 4% rent cap was brought in. The guy was kicked out of his house. He's gone back to his parents. And I said to him, you're one of the statistics, actually. You're one of the people who's the hidden homeless. And he was like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that.
Right.
And if we could put a number on that, it would be staggering.
Glenn, that's a good point. I think that's important to remind people that homelessness isn't just people sleeping on the streets. I want to get the voice of someone who has experienced homelessness firsthand into this conversation. Erica, take a look at this tweet we got from Fiona Green. She says, homelessness often affects our most vulnerable and young children, so important that those of us in a position to speak out do. Erica, you've used your voice to speak on behalf of the homeless people in Ireland. The last time you joined our show, you were in emergency housing. Can you tell us what is your situation right now?
So we were housed on the 1st of April this year. So we've been in this property for 6 months, and that's through the local authority.
So what is your house like? Are you satisfied with it?
Oh, we're in a 2-bed apartment, and we're delighted to be here because everything has settled down and normality is back, and we have routine, and the child is very happy. So once my daughter's happy, that's all that matters to me.
And you mentioned your daughter, so I pulled up pictures that you sent us of Emily. Here she is here in her new home. You can really see the joy on her face.
I want to say that Mattress Mick actually, he actually donated the mattress to us.
And Mattress Mick, of course, is the person who donated the mattresses to Apollo House.
He's very good.
That Glenn mentioned a little bit earlier. Here, your daughter is. What is she doing? She's painting the new house?
Yeah, we're painting just beyond the hall door there. So just our hall, we're just painting that a lovely purple, which came off the wall the next day. It was horrible.
but at least now you have the opportunity to make those choices yourself. And you and your daughter here. How is your daughter doing?
She's doing great. Life really has just returned to normal. She doesn't talk about when we were homeless. She doesn't want to talk about it. It's in the past, and she just wants to move on, and that's okay with me. But the other night we're sitting on the chair, and she said, "Mom, I love our house." And so I'm just really happy that she's happy and she's content. But you'd also wonder, will there be an effect on her going forward? Like, will it have a lasting consequence? And I really hope it doesn't, but I just don't know yet.
So I want to get a government voice in here. Noel, take a look at this tweet we got from Tracy. She says, lack of social housing plus lack of suitable private rentals with severely disabled child. She's describing her own situation, and she says, she could be facing pending homelessness. Noel, what would happen for a person who finds themselves without a home to live? What is the process they can go through?
Well, obviously, one person being homeless is hugely regrettable. 8,000 people being homeless is a national tragedy. Let there be no bones of contention about that from a government perspective whatsoever. This is the most urgent crisis facing this government and the issue which we want to tackle most. I know progress hasn't been as fast as people would like. It certainly hasn't been as fast as I'd like. I get cases like that previous tweet there presenting themselves to my office every week. People who are homeless, people who are at a strong risk of being homeless, and like you said yourself there, the hidden homeless as well. That's a real category. It's difficult to quantify how big that category is. But one thing perhaps worth noting is that of the people who present themselves to my office, many of them will have been on what we call the social housing list for up to 15 years or thereabouts, give and take. And that'd be the most.
And how many is on that list, Noel?
Hundreds, Erica, in truth, depending on area, it's broken down. So, for example, my areas that I cover that people would claim in would be Ballymun, Finglas, and in some cases Coolock. So it'd be quite a long list. I'm not 100% sure exactly how long each list is. I can only go by the highest figure, if you like, as in, I'd have one person who presents to my office who's 892, say, on a given list. So I don't know how much.
Oh, sorry, I
further
thought you meant the amount of people waiting on a social house, like as in on the county council list. That's what I thought you were saying. I'm
not
wondering,
the overall.
do you know the figure for that?
Yeah, I'd be familiar with the overall figure, and 90,000 or thereabouts around the country is the current list, and it's a huge list. Make no mistake about that either.
Noel, about how long do people typically expect to wait on that housing list before they're housed in adequate housing?
It's hugely dependent, Malika, on the nature of their own circumstances. I couldn't give a median date, I suppose, but certainly I would give the most extreme date, which would be up to 15 years. And the point about that being that, this crisis is going back an awful long way. And it speaks.
But no, those numbers are not going to come down. Sorry, those numbers are not going to come down when the government are building over the last 6 years 1,200 social houses. So the average would be 200 per year. So it's not going to help when you're not building social housing. I mean, indeed, I personally was on the list for eight years and then homeless for 22 months. So that's nearly 10 years on a list.
Yeah, indeed. And, your own case is hugely regrettable. And I'm glad to see that in your own case it's been resolved. But I realise that's just one case and there are a great many others. But what I would say is that this year we're going to build 4 times as many houses as we will in 2015. Is that enough? No, certainly.
But how many did you build in 2015? Sorry now to cut across you again. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Not at all. No, that's no problem.
How many was actually built in 2015?
My understanding is it was approximately 300, Erica, which would make about 1,200 for this year. Will that tackle the crisis? No, certainly not.
So I'm going to jump in here and show just a little bit of pictorial evidence of this, because this is via your Facebook page. Noel added 2 new photos. This is July 10th. Great to have Housing Minister Owen Murphy out in Dublin Northwest today. On his first stop, we met 5 families who are availing of affordable co-op housing. And the minister handed over the keys. You can see those pictures here. So this is just referencing what you mentioned a little bit earlier. Dan, how are people reacting to this conversation?
So people are talking to us about all the other services that are needed. A home is just the first step. Glenn, I want you to take a listen to this video comment we got from a woman named Sarah Carroll, and she actually wrote a young adult novel featuring a homeless character and her mother. Take a listen to Sarah.
Those that are experiencing homelessness at the moment, they need the services to get through this, such as mental health care or childcare for families with children. And if these services are not provided, we're going to see the children that are experiencing this right now having to deal with the trauma of it in years to come.
So Glenn, as Sarah said, it's not just about getting a home, it's about everything else that needs to come with it. In your experience working on this issue, what other services have you found are essential for rebuilding someone's life?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a town called Ballymun, which is on the north side of the city. It was the first tower blocks in Ireland. I think Noel, you did too. I, the issue, one of the things the government would say about not building more social houses is this idea of not creating ghettos and not wanting, to kind of, and sort of this idea of mixed tenure and all, private and social. The problem with Ballymun was just that there was nothing. I mean, there was barely a shopping centre. I mean, we were cut off, and that created a lot of problems. It created a lot of problems with people. But I have to say, having said that, I grew up in an amazing community. I grew up in an amazing community of people who pulled together and took care of each other, despite the fact that there was no services. And that lady is absolutely correct. This is only beginning. There are 2 families per day becoming homeless in Dublin, in Ireland. 2 families per day.
But according to Noel, next year 1,200 houses are going to be built, and this is supposed to be the big solution, Glenn.
Yeah, absolutely.
This year, Erica, 1,200 houses. More than that next year, and more than that the next year after. It's not for want of money that we're not finding a solution here. 1.3 billion euro will be invested this year. That figure will be matched and surpassed in the years ahead. 5 billion, over 5 billion over the next 4 years.
Let's talk about figures. No, 22 houses were recently bought by the local authority for 480,000 per unit off a millionaire. Now, it costs 200,000 to build a council house, land and all included. So that would buy it 2.5 times the house, like per unit. So why are we throwing money down the drain?
But to fold back to Glenn's point there earlier on, Glenn grew up in effectively the same area as I did. 100% social housing within that building that I grew up in. Now, what happened there was that the wraparound services to accompany 100% social housing simply didn't follow, and really never followed. In terms of public transport, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of policing, they never followed, and those people were left waiting, and in many cases are still waiting for the services they deserve. So that's why I'd be keen to learn from those mistakes and not engage in building on every greenfield site in the vicinity of that particular part in Northside Dublin, and rather trying to build sustainable, cohesive communities of, mixed tenure, affordable housing, like that one featured on my Facebook profile.
Social housing worked all over Dublin. Social housing worked all over Dublin. Ballymun was an extreme example, actually. And as I said, an amazing place to grow up. I absolutely wouldn't change a thing.
And I completely agree with you. Social housing does work, and it works best, though, I believe, Glenn, when it is in a mixed environment, a mixed tenure area. You look at, Crumlin, for example. I think it works very well in Crumlin.
So Noel and Glenn, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying about social housing. I want to bring in one more voice. So this is Tracy, and she might disagree. She says social housing wait lists are many years long. If you're not selected as a tenant in private rental market, homelessness is next. And it's that point that I actually want to pick up on, because Al Jazeera spoke to someone who talks about how you could go from having a job and living in a home to not. This is Brian Kearney. He spoke to Al Jazeera and he shared his story of how he ended up on the streets of Dublin. Have a look.
We were brought into the office one morning, 30 drivers, and we all were laid off. Basically, we have to give you a month's layoff. It was a shock to everybody. Everybody, had mortgages. I know at least 10 different drivers that lost their house from it because they're all struck on big mortgages. Never thought this would ever come to an end.
Dan, I know people online are talking about how that could be in a rich country
exactly.
like
people
Ireland.
Are wondering how did rents get so high in the first place that people couldn't afford homes. Glenn, take a look at this YouTube comment we just got from Donnie Barnes. He says, is there a reason why rent is so high in Ireland, like property tax, insurance, or maintenance? If you could bring those costs down, more people could afford the rent. Glenn, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, we have soaring. I mean, I've got a dear friend. He was, Simon Coveney brought in a 4% rent cap last year. So the idea was that people can't raise the rent any more than landlords, because it's not very regulated in this country. The landlords are not allowed to raise the rent by more than 4% in 2 years. And just before it was implemented, not every landlord, I'm not going to say that's not fair, but a lot of landlords hiked the rent up by 55%. He was like, he called me, he says, I think I'm he was shocked. He said, I think I'm about to lose me home. And he said, but you know what, Glenn, I'm a middle class fella. I know I've got me ma. I know I've got my aunts and uncles, and I'm kind of protected, but this is shocking. This, to my pride, this is a huge blow. Now, if he wasn't in that position and he was another guy like the lad we just saw, you know, you'd be straight. You're knocked straight into homelessness by these massive costs. We've got one of the highest in the OECD for low wages, and we have soaring house prices. So where does that leave you? I mean, if the average industrial wage is the low wages, and you've got extremely rising house prices and rent prices, it's leading to a housing emergency. And it was really interesting to hear you, Noel, say catastrophe, or I think that was the word you used a few minutes ago. But why doesn't the government just say
was actually
national tragedy? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Don't want to misquote you, Noel. But why doesn't the government just call it what it is, which is a national emergency?
Well, I think, to go back to the tweet that was submitted to us, I think it's a very interesting question, particularly from an international point of view, as to why house prices are going up so much and why rent is going up so much. I think one of the things that we've seen when it comes to housing assistance is that, the municipal authorities, the local councils, are effectively having to admit defeat and say that they'll pay effectively any market rent right now. We see that in our office regularly because the market rent is running up by 15-20% per annum in places that are outside the area of a rent cap, if you like. And there are landlords, Glenn, and you're absolutely right, who are acting in an unscrupulous way and are working around the rent cap where at all possible. For example, there's an exemption if you carry out refurbishment to a house. In theory, you can then circumvent the 4% rent cap. We see people doing that. We have cases in my office where people are painting a kitchen and claiming that's substantial refurbishment.
So
therefore, we can put it up by 20%.
There's a landlord I know. Can I just step in 1 second? There's a landlord I know who and somebody I know well, and it's kind of depressing, who said to me, "I won't take in Irish residents. I will not bring them in. They know their rights. They know this and that, and they want HAP, and I'll take in Brazilians because they'll just pay the rent and shut up." I mean, that's the country we're living in, and what's heartbreaking to go back, is the idea that this is wrought upon the Irish by the Irish.
Glenn,
and I'm not saying in every case.
Just to pick up, Glenn, on something you said earlier, you raised the issue of the government needing to declare an emergency. Noel, on that issue, take a listen to this video comment we got from a young man named Justin who was homeless as of 2 months ago.
My name's Justin Casey. I'm 25 years old. In the past 7 years, I've had to declare myself as homeless on 2 separate occasions. The first of which, at the age of 18, I spent a year sleeping on the streets outside the GPO on O'Connell Street. More recently, I spent over 8 months in hostels all throughout Dublin. We have babies being born into homelessness. Babies their first day of life is in homelessness, but yet the government won't declare a state of an emergency. If the government do declare a state of emergency, it opens up the floodgates for support from the European Union. This will allow funding for invigorative building and local industry.
So, Noel, we're running out of time, but if you could just answer this in 30 seconds. Should the government of Ireland seek assistance from the EU?
Well, we're already treating this like an emergency, is the reality. We're already
No, you're not, Noel. All you're doing is pushing
the European Investment
All
Bank.
you're doing is pushing the deck chairs around. That's all you're doing.
And 1.3 billion.
All the government keeps on saying is we're in recovery.
It's not for lack of money, and it's not for lack of will. Pardon me.
We're in recovery. The economy is flying. We're in recovery. It's like all you hear is the government's flying. We're in recovery. The nation, everyone's spending. It's great. A country should be measured not on how many millionaires it has and not on how many investment companies are in it, but how it treats its most vulnerable. And it's kind of shameful right now, to be honest.
And you're missing your own targets
where I'm going to have to pause this
No.
conversation. I know there's so much more to discuss. We'll have to do it on #AJStream. Our thanks to Glen Hansard, Erica Fleming, and Noel Rock for joining us. And of course, to our community for pitching the story in the first place and for being part of this conversation. We'll see you online with #AJStream.